another Tom, Dick, or Dave. These are our Frenzy Faves.
Today, our Frenzy Faves is a favorite Twilight Zone episode.
Chris, tell us about the episode we're looking at today.
Thanks, Prof. The episode we're going to look at today is called Odyssey of Flight 33. This was from Season 2, Episode 18. It was directed by Justice Addis. It was written by Rod Serling himself. The original air date was February 24th, 1961. For our cast, we have John Anderson, a past that guy, as Captain Skipper Farver, Paul Comey as First Officer Craig, Sandy Kenyon as Navigator Magellan Hatch, Hart McGuire as Flight Engineer Purcell, Beverly Brown as Jeannie, Wayne Heffley as Second Officer Wyatt, Betty Gard as a passenger, Jay Overholtz as a passenger, Nancy Rennick as Paula, Lester Fletcher as a Royal Air Force man, and Robert McCord as a passenger. Prof, what happens with the Odyssey of Flight 33?
Well, it's a beautiful day for a transatlantic flight in 1961. Captain Farver, or as they call him, Skipper, is the experienced hand at the wheel, or the stick, or whatever they say. So Flight 33 is a state-of-the-art Boeing 707 jetliner flying at 35,000 feet going from London to Idlewild Airport near New York City. So little note, it's 1961. JFK is still president, and they're not naming airports after him yet. Okay, so suddenly the captain feels like there's acceleration and asks the navigator, who he calls Magellan, for a speed check. Magellan says, oh yeah, they're going a normal speed relative to the air, so our airspeed is fine. Captain can't shake the feeling, and he has the speed versus the ground checked. Shockingly, they are going way too fast. 800 knots per hour, 1,200, 2,000, 3,000. But, since the air around them is traveling along with them, the plane isn't shaking and it doesn't feel like, you're going too fast. It's hard to tell. But then there's a flash and the ship shudders and they thought they broke the sound barrier. But then what was the flash? The sound barrier doesn't have a flash. And they say, oh, we'll get somebody on the radio. But there's nobody on the radio. It's silent and all their navigation is dead. Well, Skipper's had enough of this, and he decides he's going to take the plane down below the clouds and see where they are, if they're close to New York yet, and see if maybe they can land. There is a concern that if they're getting close to the airport, there could be a lot of planes down there, but, we're just going to have to suck it up. So they go anyway. And when they get below the cloud cover, they see Manhattan Island and Staten Island and Long Island. All the islands are there, but there aren't any buildings. What? Skipper does a low flyby, and by gosh, that's a brontosaurus. So they traveled back in time to the dinosaur age. Well, that's not going to do. So Skipper brings the 707 back up into the time stream above the clouds. The airplane speeds up again, and they go through the flash and shake, and Skipper brings the plane down below the clouds again, and thank goodness there are buildings. They decide that they have to land at LaGuardia Airport, but when they contact LaGuardia Tower, the tower's confused that, what are you flying? A jet? A 707? What's a jet airplane? They look out the window and see the World's Fair. They have traveled to 1939, not quite 1961. Skipper gets on the horn of the passengers and tell them that they are very early to the gate, 22 years early. He explains the situation and then points the aircraft skyward to try to catch the time stream and nudge them a few years forward. I have to say, I really, really enjoyed this episode. There are a couple of reasons. I'm very familiar with LaGuardia and Kennedy, or Idlewild as they called it then. And also I was an aerospace engineer for, 12 years or so, and worked on airplanes at Boeing and Pratt & Whitney. So I have a pretty good idea what they were saying when they were trying to fly out of their situation. But I think what I really liked is the concept at the end of having this plane being like a kind of a ghost plane, traveling through time to find their way home. It's really cool. I thought the acting, it was very static. There was a lot of, mostly from the cockpit. It was, almost like 75, 80% of this, of the time of this episode. The acting was really good and really gripping. And it was just a bunch of guys in chairs. Now, there was a lot of other stuff. There was some cockpit chatter, and there's some stewardess drama and a little bit of passenger stuff. And there's a little bit. And while it raises the stakes, like, you're like, oh, I don't want these stewardesses to get killed. And these kind of passengers are cool. Nothing really happens. They're little vignettes. And, they just have a little interaction and they leave it at that. So it's really just to build the tension. One thing that was kind of interesting is when they first noticed that when they went back to dinosaur era, after they had come through the shaking, I kind of thought, well, maybe there was like a nuclear bomb and, there's no buildings could mean that it's just the devastation. But no, there's no buildings mean it's a jungle and there's brontosauruses. There's definitely a little fun Brontosaurus picture, and luckily it didn't last long enough to get too good a look at it because it looked kind of cheesy, but that's good. So I thoroughly enjoyed Odyssey of Flight 33. What'd you think about it, Chris?
Prof, I loved your comments. I wish we could talk more about it because I think we got a lot more to say, but here we go. To get some trivia out of the way, as per usual, John Anderson, who played Captain Farber, was a past that guy. He also appeared in the Twilight Zone episodes, The Old Man in the Cave. Of late, I think of Cliffordville and A Passage for a Trumpet. Sandy Kenyon, who was in the back there, who played the navigator nicknamed Magellan, also appeared in the Twilight Zone episodes The Shelter and Valley of the Shadows. For some more trivia, Serling's brother was an aviation writer, Robert J. Serling, and he helped Rod write the cockpit dialogue for the show by discussing the show's premise with a TWA captain. After the show aired, several pilots later wrote in to say that they thought the cockpit dialogue was among the most authentic ever in a TV show. Wow, how about that?
Yeah, it felt real.
Yeah. I read, I think this might have been in Mark Zakri's book, that John Anderson would later get comments about this episode years later, and he was asked if he thought if the plane ever made it back. Anderson as the captain is excellent in this episode. A lot is asked of him, in my opinion, and he blends in some bravery, a guy you can feel confident in. But he also admits he's scared too, but he never panics. I think you've got a lot of emotions at play here. That's a lot to ask of an actor, and he really pulls it off effectively.
Yep.
This, Professor, as you alluded to, is sort of akin to the Flying Dutchman type of thing where you've got this lost ship. And it would really be interesting to do a compare and contrast with some of the Twilight Zone episodes that we talk about. There's one called The Passage of a Lady Anne, which is actually a cruise ship on the water. And you wonder if this thing is ever going to make it back. One of the things that struck me, even as a kid watching this, is you've got a 5-person crew. And I'm just wondering, were crews always that size for that period of time in the early 60s? Because now I just presume we've got a pilot and a co-pilot, and that's all we have, and that's it. I wonder if the crew sizes in commercial planes had 5 able bodies there. Well, thank goodness for the actors. They all had something to do. One of the things that I think is really cool, you see it just for a brief second when the show opens, is that you see Farber smoking in the cockpit. And I thought that was a really, really cool touch. He just kind of it's just for a millisecond, a little glimpse, but you could just see him with the cigarette. I'm just wondering if that was a thing back then as well. And when that mortar got abandoned. Twilight Zone has endings sort of like this. They're kind of open-ended. And in this episode's end, we see that our group is still in peril. The peril is still in progress, and the fate of our characters are unresolved. And I wondered if you like that ending as a kid. For me, I think this worked because you kind of leave it up to your own devices as to whether they make it back or not. Now, this plane, as stated, is low on fuel. And as a kid, I'm thinking to myself, why can't they land in 39? They're out of gas. Might as well land and then just try to fly back up again. What's stopping them from doing that? Land, refuel, fine. Get. Maybe they don't have the same kind of fuel, but I'm sure they can get back up in the air. I don't know. They got to have some kind of concoction to make them fly again. I'm not sure. Maybe they didn't have jet fuel back then, so they couldn't do it. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not the scientific, but I think I don't think the ending would have been as effective if we saw that they made it back. I think it's more effective that it kind of leaves you hanging a little bit and you wonder what that next attempt will do. What happens, as a kid, I thought, what happens if they overshoot it? What if they don't, or is it possible to overshoot it? Or what if they go back too far? Then what do you do? I think they only had one more shot at it with the fuel situation. and you wonder where they went, what became of them. One little thing too, when I first saw this episode, is when I lived in the regions of Wisconsin, where sometimes it was kind of rare to see a jet plane fly over, I would think, gee, I wonder if that's Flight 33 up there. And despite the fact that I didn't live anywhere remotely close to New York City, but it was like, it kind of made me think, because, with Rod Serling's closing narration, if you hear desperate engines ahead, if you hear it up in the sky, shoot up a flare, do something, that's got to be Flight 33. So I'm thinking, wow, what's that plane doing there? Maybe it's Flight 33. It's a really good episode, I thought. And Professor, like you, I didn't know about your engineering background, and I think that's fascinating. And the dialogue in the cockpit seeming so real. So I'm glad you could corroborate on some of those things with respect to that.
Yeah, it was interesting that your comments, because I felt the same way. I mean, there were one or two things that I thought they could have done, but differently, like that they would have probably done next. But there's only 22 minutes of episode.
Yeah, you got to cover some ground. Yeah.
Move the story along. I thought Anderson was amazing in this. That could have been a role that was very boring, right? He's just the quiet, confident guy flying, but no, he gave it a lot of nuance without like having lines. He just kind of breathed the character of the skipper, Farver. I really felt he was a real airline pilot. I thought he was terrific in this.
Yeah, and the roles he tends to get tend to be authoritative roles.
Yeah.
There was an episode of Y50 where he plays like a military upper echelon guy, high-ranking official, and he's trying to get to the bottom of the death of one of his sons. Really effective there. An episode of MASH that I alluded to where, he has a son, and his son passes away, and he gets just so...
Yeah.
Pissed at Hawkeye, and he has to vent with respect to that. He's a burdened character, but he really is great in this episode. He's a talented actor in everything I see him in, but really, really good stuff here. And I even like the little throwaway line where he says, well, just before he gets on the PA, he says, well, now I got to do some, public relations work. And I just like the way he said it, and he knows his role and what he's got to do as the captain, and it's his job to get all the souls back safely, and just the way he does it. And I love that he admits he's scared, but he keeps on trying, and he's got that seasonedness of him where he feels the vibrations of the acceleration before everybody else does. This is a veteran pilot, and you really feel confidence in him doing what he's doing. This is really, really good stuff.
I totally agree. So Odyssey of Flight 33 is one of our favorite Twilight Zone episodes.
Not just another Tom, Dick, or Dave. These are our friends he made.